Welcome to the Ryder Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg Drevenstedt, Editor-in-Chief of Ryder Magazine. On the show today, I've got my friend and colleague, Kevin Duke. He's a senior editor at Ryder Magazine as well, and he's also Editor-in-Chief at American Ryder. How you doing, Duke?
I'm doing great. It's 2025. It's a new year. Ready to roll.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the episode, I want to thank Hard Drive American V-Twin Products for their support. In a dynamic and ever-evolving industry, Hard Drive remains driven to provide innovative brands and products to its global dealer network. The 2025 Hard Drive catalog has over 700 new items that span across all product categories. Hard Drive strives to deliver top-quality service items and competitive value. This year, it has expanded into carburation, rear drive belts, and mechanic service covers. It has a new exclusive partnership with Cerwin-Vega and Diamond Audio, two brands with deep roots in the audio industry. Hard Drive has also added Wild Ass seat cushions and Cobra USA exhaust systems, slip-on mufflers, sissy bars, luggage racks, and freeway bars to its family of brands. Visit hdtwin.com or your nearest Western Power Sports dealer to learn more. So thanks again, Hard Drive. Yeah, as we're recording this, we're halfway through January. It's already into 2025. Always feels a little bit weird. So as you know, some of our listeners, definitely our readers of Ryder Magazine, know that 2024 was a really kind of a milestone year for us. It was our 50th anniversary. The first issue of Ryder Magazine was published in summer of 1974, a year before I was born. No, a year after I was born. I was born in 1973. And in the past 50 years, we've published 579 issues of the magazine. So I've went through pretty much every single issue. They're in bound volumes on my shelves and went through and spent hours and hours looking at covers and old features. And it's really a blast from the past, especially the stuff from the 70s. I mean, it was before my time as a writer, but it was a lot of groovy stuff back then in terms of products and accessories and things. Before we had bikes that were outfitted with a lot of that stuff, there were all kinds of companies that sold all kinds of accessories. So,
By the way, you should be really freaking proud to have gotten to that 50-year mark. That there's so few publications that have even come close to that, and for you to be carrying the ball forward, that deserves a round of applause.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. You know, it was had the pleasure to start working at the magazine under Mark Tuttle. He was the editor-in-chief for 32 years. He started working for the magazine in 1984. So he was there for about at the 10-year mark. He started working there and then worked there for another 36 years. Like Dennis Rouse, who founded the magazine. There were other editors such as Bill Estes, and was Bob Mindell, then Bill Estes, then Tash Matsuoko before Mark Tuttle. So yeah, to be able to learn from those guys on that legacy, it's been great. It's been an honor. So yeah.
And it was fantastic to get those people to contribute to some of your 50th anniversary year editions. It was great to get their voices back in Ryder.
Yeah, it was good because we have a section in the magazine called Exhaust Note. It's a guest editorial, and so every month in this 2024 we had, like I said, these past editors, we had contributors, former staffers, people that are pretty well known, like Alan Paulson, Jamie Elvidge, Clem Salvadori, Grace Butcher, who was the first female columnist in Ryder Magazine back in the late 70s and early 80s. We had, just like I said, a lot of people that really sort of were recalling their experiences at Ryder and what it was like back in the 70s or the 80s and experiences they had and shared some laughs. And then we also had some retrospective content where we'd have a few pages in every issue about, favorite covers or favorite ads or something like that. And it was fun to put that together. And then, of course, our December issue, the last issue of the year, was a special 50th anniversary issue. Our art director created this really cool cover with a big 50 on it, but it had all these old covers as a collage, and it was really pretty high impact visual. We had a kind of a 50-year timeline where we kind of walked through the history of Ryder and the motorcycle industry and shared some laughs and some memories and covers and images. And it was very, one of the things that really worked out well though, is the Honda Goldwing was announced to the public just a couple of months after Ryder's first issue was published. And it was introduced as a 1975. It went on sale in 1975, but it was announced in 1974. So it has a 50-year history that very much parallels Ryder's and in many ways is interwoven with our history because, there have been 6 generations of the Honda Goldwing. We've tested every generation multiple times. The bike has been on our cover 29 times in the past 50 years. Every generation from the GL 1000 all the way up through the second version of the GL 1800, we've tested many times and had in travel stories and features. And back, like I said, in the early days when there wasn't much of an aftermarket or Honda didn't have a full dress Goldwing, we had a lot of products that were, an aftermarket cottage industry sort of developed around the Goldwing, and we had a lot of
Windjammer.
ads about that. So we've the Goldwing. We started picking motorcycle of the year as a selection starting in 1990. We've picked the Goldwing twice in 2001 when they came out with the really kind of revolutionary GL 1800, which is was a really sleek bike, but also handled really well. And then when they came out with the second version, the GL 1800 in 2018, so had as our motorcycle of the year. And now here we're in 2025. It's the Goldwing's official 50th anniversary. We expect there will be a 50th anniversary edition. They've done anniversary editions at the 20-year mark and 25-year mark. And in fact, Ryder, for a number of years, we owned a 2000. It was the GL 1500 generation, and we had an SE 25th anniversary edition model that we owned, the magazine owned, and we used it as we called it our photo wagon, because we'd have photographers like Rich Cox or Kevin Wing would put their camera gear in the back, and whatever group of bikes that the staff, and I was on some of those trips, it would be, touring bikes or sport touring bikes or cruisers, and they would chase us, through the canyons, wherever we were testing the bikes to do photo shoots and ride the wheels off that Goldwing. If you've ever been on a Goldwing, they got big, wide foot pegs, and they were ground down so much that the very edge of it was like as sharp as a knife, and it was like really beveled to a fine major updates in anniversary years, or they haven't. So don't know that we expect that for the Goldwing this year, but they'll certainly have a 50th anniversary edition that will have special badging, probably a unique paint job. Maybe it'll have a commemorative book or something like that that will go along with it, because the Golden Jubilee, it's a big one.
A golden anniversary for a Goldwing. They got
Yeah.
to have an anniversary edition. That bike is an icon in the world of motorcycling. It is the class standard, or has been for essentially.
And then our anniversary issue in December, Alan Cathcart, who's the global globe-trotting moto journalist, he gets everywhere and has tested 3,000 different motorcycles. He's his own sort of industry, but he tested a first generation GL 1000 recently. He did it last year. We got it from a guy in Pennsylvania who runs a company called Retro Tours, who's got a fleet of vintage, mostly Japanese bikes. They're fours or twins or something like that. But he wrote a contemporary review of the GL 1000, what the first generation Goldwing was like. Still impressive to this day, 50 years later. Yes, it's got antiquated suspension and brakes and so forth, but the smoothness of the engine that really made it, that's really kind of the calling card of the Goldwing. But as he talks about some of the history of the GL 1000 and its development, it was really kind of a blue sky bike for Honda. They already made the CB 750, which was a Motorcyclist magazine picked that as their motorcycle of the century for the 20th century, for the 1900s. Really a revolutionary bike, and this was something that Honda was known for its engineering, known for its reliability, and they're like, hey, let's flex, let's show people what we can do. And they built this flat four 1000cc bike, shaft drive, dual discs up front, dual disc brakes, and it was essentially a naked performance bike. It was really smooth. It was second only to the Kawasaki Z1 of the time, which was the fastest production bike you could buy. But it was kind of big, and it was also really smooth, so it didn't really fit into the mold of a performance bike. Handled really well because it had the engine. That flat four was low center of gravity, and then the shaft drive and the smoothness of the engine, it was perfectly balanced. It was really the customers that started buying the Goldwing that really turned it into a touring bike. That's not what Honda didn't try to create a touring bike. It was, again, if you look at the original Goldwing, it was a naked bike, and but it was reliable. It was smooth. It had enough carrying capacity that you could have a passenger. You could have you could add saddlebags or luggage or something like that and go the distance. And then
And very
the
little
Goldwing,
maintenance. That was a big thing, right? It was I think Honda's first shaft-driven motorcycle. And so if you're putting a bunch of miles on, nobody wants to be standing in front of the hotel or the campsite and oiling their
exactly.
chain. So yeah, shaft drive was a big advantage.
Well, and I think that's something that we take for granted now is the reliability of cars and motorcycles is they just don't break down very often. But back then it was quite, it was not uncommon for certain bikes built in America, built in the UK, bikes that were known for leaking oil and, like you said, dodgy electrics, whatever it might be. But that's really how Honda built its reputation and became a manufacturing giant. Was create is it's the not only its engineering sort of expertise, but the quality of its manufacturing and the reliability of its products. And so, like you
And
said, yeah, you could go out for a ride and ride cross country and you wouldn't break down. And that was something you couldn't take for granted for back in the 70s.
its supreme reliability was is part of the reason why there's a couple English motorcycle manufacturers that went out of business. They
Right,
couldn't
right,
make them
exactly.
reliable, and thankfully Triumph's come back and they're making some amazing bikes now. But yeah, in the 1975, a truly reliable motorcycle that didn't require much maintenance was kind of a rare thing.
Yeah, and over the years, Goldwing was 2006 was the first motorcycle to be offered with an airbag, which you can still get on a
Right.
Goldwing.
Yeah.
The dual clutch transmission, which is common in the automotive industry, but was first introduced on the Honda VFR 1200. It took a while for it to migrate over the Goldwing, but it was a 7-speed DCT in the 2018 Goldwing that we selected as motorcycle of the year. Fantastic. It's you can shift either it can shift automatically or you can use paddle shifters to shift manually. It's got different modes and so forth. So yeah, it's still a very sophisticated and high tech motorcycle. It's not
Yeah,
it's
that
not just smooth
DCT
and comfortable. Yeah.
A DCT is cool, and isn't it right? Like experienced riders go, "I'm going to shift my own gears. I've been doing it for whatever years." But isn't it true that the Gold Wings, about half of them or something, are ordered with DCT now?
A few years ago, I had talked to somebody at Honda who said that of the models that they sell with the DCT available, so it's the Goldwing, the Africa Twin, the Rebel 1100, the NC 750X. I think those are the main ones. Yeah, about half of those sold are with DCTs. Now, when you get the DCT, that's often when you get the ABS and you get some other rider aids or tech to go with it. But it works fantastic on the early in the VFR in 2010 was a little bit crude compared to how well it works now. It took just like early ABS to the cornering
Right.
ABS that we have today, but yeah, it works fantastic. So well, like I said, we're at the beginning of 2025. We're looking ahead to what's coming up. A lot of bikes have already been announced. Most of them have been announced for the model year. We've got a buyer's guide on our website, on Ryder's website, that's basically just new and updated motorcycles that are street legal. And there are about 80 different motorcycles that have been announced. It's a long list. It's a little bit more than last year. I think it was about 70, but so these are bikes that are either all new models that haven't been available before, or they've got a substantial update in some way. They've got changes to the engine, changes to the styling, etc. So there are many models, many more models, dozens more that are what we call returning models. That it's the bold new graphics. They get a different paint job, they get a different that, but there's no running changes to the mechanical changes to the bike in terms of its.
We're more
So
interested.
yeah, exactly. So the interesting thing, you and I had a conversation. We did a podcast about this time last year. We were looking ahead to 2024, and on the list of bikes that were new and updated for 2024, it seemed to be the year of the ADV. About a third of the bikes were either full-on adventure bikes like the R1300 GS, which we selected as our motorcycle of the year for 2024. There were dual sport bikes or there were adventure style crossovers, something like the Suzuki GSX-S 1000 GX Plus, which has adventure sort of seating position or styling, but it's still primarily a street bike. But that
Kind of
was
like the Yamaha Tracer, right? It's a street bike, but it has like taller, more roomy ergonomics that fit bigger riders better. And
right. And for me, I mean, I know I'm a lot taller than you or the average rider. I'm 6 feet tall. I've got a 34-inch inseam. I love adventure bikes mainly because I can ride long miles or long distances on those things in comfort. It's my back is pretty straight, my arms are relaxed, I've got a lot of leg room. Whereas sportier bikes, cruisers of some kind, some of them kind of fold your body into weird positions and create some pain points. Of course, the challenge that we've talked about before is with adventure bikes. For some people, it's just because they have tall suspension and tall seat heights, they're out of reach, literally, for some people.
Hmm. But in terms of usability and versatility, ADVs can't really be beat.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that market's hot.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. It continues to be a kind of a growth segment. But what's interesting for 2025 is there are still some new adventure bikes have been announced. I mean, BMW came out with the adventure version of the R1300 GS, and there are some others. But I would say if I had to say anything about 2025 lineup of new and updated models, it's kind of the year of the naked bike. So we've got about 80 bikes that have been announced so far, give or take. And again, street legal street bikes here, but a lot of them, about 1 in 4, are sport bikes or standards with little or no bodywork. So
That's like everybody was saying years ago, oh, sport bikes are hot, right? That was a
right.
really hot market. And a lot of journalists were saying, can't you just make these things in like a Ducati Monster, right? It's a sport bike, but it doesn't have the fairings and the uncomfortable riding position. And it seems like it's finally catching on.
Well, like kind of like we say with adventure bikes, when you've got a sport bike, which is, even if it doesn't usually get ridden on the track, it's often designed in that style of a replica racer where you've got low clip-ons, maybe a high seat, high rear set pegs. And so it's what some people may call like kind of the sneak bug riding position, because you're kind of crouched over it and and again, it may be optimal for riding on a track or something. But if you're riding the canyons and you've got a 50-mile freeway ride to get to those canyon roads, so at the end of the day, maybe your neck hurts or your wrist hurts. Or I know I'm 50, so I'm talking about it, and the guys in their 20s wouldn't care. But the naked bikes, they often will have an upright handlebar. And so like the Aprilia Tuono was one of those classic bikes where it was a full-on sport bike, but it had an upright handlebar and you could sit a little bit more upright. And in fact, for 25, Aprilia's got three different Tuono models updated. It's got the new Tuono 457, so it's got a
Mm.
smaller displacement version. It's got the Tuono 660, and then it's got the Tuono V4. And so
Right.
all three of those have been updated, and they're all naked bikes. So
Makes sense to me. I like sporty, but I don't like being uncomfortable. Give me a
yeah,
naked bike.
yeah. I mean, so other naked bikes, BMW's got the F900R, the M1000R, and the S1000R have all been updated. And then what's kind of interesting is Can-Am, which is a brand that, of course, they make side by sides and four wheelers, but in the street side, they've been known since 2007, 2008 for their Spiders and Rikers, their three-wheeled models, which are great machines, but they're not a motorcycle in the traditional sense of having two wheels. And Can-Am used to make dirt bikes, motocross bikes in the 70s. They won some championships on those things, but haven't made a two-wheeled motorcycle since the late 80s. But they came out for 2025 with two new two-wheelers. There's the Pulse Roadster and the Origin Dual Sport. But the unique thing about them is they're all electric. They've decided to not go for an internal combustion engine and go all electric for 2025 for their two-wheelers.
I think the designs look great, and Ron Liebeck reviewed it pretty well. But like every electric motorcycle, it's a battery. You want more range, you need a bigger battery. You want a bigger battery, it's more money, it's more weight. And so that's always the thing on a motorcycle is the battery. In a car, you could put a 1,000-pound battery in a Tesla,
Right, right,
and
right,
nobody notices. But try to
right.
put a 500-pound battery on a motorcycle, and you're going to struggle to make that rideable.
Well, and that's the thing about the Pulse and the Origin. So they're based, they share a powertrain and drivetrain. It's basically, if you look at the bikes without their bodywork, they've got a big battery pack that's got a case around it. That essentially is kind of like the frame. Everything's sort of built around it. It's got the steering head is attached to it. The liquid cooling system for the motor and controller and everything is attached to that. The controller for all the electronics, the single-sided swing arm is
Mhm.
attached to this battery case structure. The chain is enclosed within the single-sided swing arm. It's in an oil bath, and so that oil needs to be changed every 10,000 miles roughly, but the chain apparently can last for 100,000 miles. Like a scooter, their motor is attached to the swing arm, and so the geometry is such that when you're accelerating on these things, there's really no squat at the rear end. Where
Yeah.
normally the rear end, the rear shock and everything would sort of compress as you accelerate, but that doesn't happen on. Again, I look forward to riding them. You're right. Ron Lieback, a contributor, went to the launch for us last September, but he was impressed with both in terms of so the battery pack, excuse me, the motor makes about 47 horsepower and 53 foot-pounds of torque, which is roughly equivalent to a 700 cc, internal combustion bike. The challenge, though, which you just mentioned, is you can only carry so much battery. So these bikes are fairly light. They're about 400 pounds. There's difference. The Origin with its larger spoked wheels and so forth is a little heavier. They're about 400 pounds, but they have limited range. The mixed like city highway range is about 70 to 80 miles, and that's kind of optimal conditions. They're if you do sustained highway speeds, you're going to deplete the battery much faster, and they're even electronically limited to 80 miles per hour as a top speed to avoid depleting the battery too fast. So
The Roadster makes sense as a commuter where, you're only commuting 20 or 30 miles or less, and so you just plug it in the garage at night and it's always got a full tank. The more troublesome one is the dual sport, where hopefully you're going away from civilization and you're not likely to find a level 2 battery charger out there in the woods.
yeah, I mean you can do level one charging with a household 120-volt outlet, but that's going to take hours and hours. It's going to take a lot longer. Level two. So yeah, it's interesting. You what was the last electric bike you tested? One of the live wire, the S2?
Yeah, the S2 Del Mar, which I ended up liking a lot more than I thought I was going to. For that commuter use case scenario where, your trips, you're not traveling interstate or something, you just need a bike to get around quickly. It's quiet. It's always got a full battery because it's plugged into my garage, and it's fast. It's fun. It does wheelies and everything. And it's got a dirt track kind of styling motif to it. And so it doesn't look like a spaceshipy electric bike like some of them do. And I think Harley did a really good job with that. The battery design has fins, so it kind of mimics an engine cylinder finning for air cooling. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's just it can't be the only bike in your garage because I want to go further than 100 miles or 60 miles or whatever it is. You get on the freeway and that battery just gets sucked down quickly.
Well, yeah, you and I both work from home, so there's no commuting scenario for us, and so we want to go ride for pleasure. And if you live, I know I live pretty close to some mountain roads and some canyon roads, but again, if I'm 15 miles to get to them, and then I want to get into the canyon roads, and I've got to be very conscious about turning around and coming back to make sure I can get to a home or charging location, and that can take quite a bit of time. So, yeah, I mean, if we've all had range anxiety, and when you low on gas, low fuel light comes on, you maybe you didn't notice when it came on or something like that. You're like, oh, am I going to make it to a gas station? That's kind of again, not maybe a very specific 15, 20-mile commute. You're going back and forth, you're putting it on the charger. Maybe you wouldn't worry about it then. But if you're riding an unknown distance and then you've got to be conscious about, turning back and so forth. Yeah, that is a limitation. Absolutely. Yeah.
You run out of gas on a motorcycle and Billy Bob can toss you a couple of gallons in the back of his pickup and you could be on your way instantly. You can't carry a gallon of electricity to your electric motorcycle.
That reminds me of years ago, I was testing one of the Ducati Sport Classics. It was the GT 1000, maybe it was. And I was riding from California I was going to go to the Bonneville Salt Flats for the speed trials. And I was on US Route 6 that actually goes cross country, but the portion that goes through Utah and part of Nevada is truly the loneliest road. There's like long stretches where there's no services, there's no
Yeah.
nothing. And of course, because it was deserted and I was just having fun, I just was out. I had it just wrung out. And of course, I went through a lot of gas really fast. And then I didn't, never been on the road, didn't know how far I was from the next gas station. And I saw how low the fuel light, and actually pulled up to somebody's house and walked. And this was, walked up their driveway and it was kind of a farmhouse. I mean, it was set back a ways and I felt really weird. And And I knocked on the door. I was like, "Hey, where's the nearest gas station?" And they actually had a gas can on their porch, and I was able to get a gallon from them. And I gave them a few bucks. They're like, "You don't realize how many people stop here and ask us that. So we always keep a couple gallons of gas available." And but I was like 30 miles from a gas station. I definitely would, or longer. I don't remember, but I definitely wouldn't have made it. So yeah, that happens. But like you said, I and took 5 minutes,
Right.
but if I said, "Hey, can I stick my electric bike on your wall charger for the next 6 hours?" They would have told me to. So, yeah. So let's see. Speaking of the Livewire, you were talking about the S2 Del Mar. The Livewire just recently announced the Alpinista, which
Alpinista, yes. Which is it looks pretty cool. It's like a Del Mar. It looks very much like a Del Mar, but instead of the Del Mar's 19-inch front and rear tires and the dirt track tread pattern, this has a set of 17-inch Michelins on it. So it's designed more for the street than the image, maybe the flat track image
gotcha.
of the Del Mar. So yeah, it's going to be another appealing motorcycle for the commuter, but it's got the same limitations, no level 3 charging, just level 1 and 2 and the same size battery. So yeah, great commuter, I'm sure, but limited.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, we just, because of the size of the vehicle, we just haven't quite cracked the. I mean, of course, you and I live in California, and so it's quite superchargers and other things around here. So it's becoming more commonplace here in Southern California. I know, again, in other parts of the country, there's a lot lower uptake levels for electric cars, but the electric bikes are still the range situation, sorted can make it go longer, recharge faster, and the third major barrier I always think is price because they're built in low numbers, and given the tech that's involved, the batteries, so forth, they're still pretty expensive. I mean, if for example, the Can-Am Pulse, as cool as it is with all of its tech, it's got active and passive regen, and it's got ride modes, and it's got all kinds of stuff. It's $14,000, and it's the power equivalent of a 700cc internal combustion bike. So that would be like, say, a Yamaha MT-07, which is about half as much money. I don't know, probably about 8 grand. So
Yeah.
it's substantially less expensive. So again, it's not like just, oh, it's an additional $1,000 to go electric. It can sometimes be almost twice as much money. So
Same with the Del Mar and the Alpinista. They're around 16 grand. So,
yeah.
it takes a bit of a bank account to get into it as a toy, right? Like, well, no, I shouldn't say a toy. If it's a commuter, it's a useful tool. But if you want to go far, then it's going to be disappointing.
Talk about some of the 2025 bikes we've already ridden. I mean, so I think we talked about this last year. It used to be you had a fairly traditional rollout schedule of the new model year bikes. I mean, it used to be years ago it would be Harley and Victory before Polaris brought Indian, but now and then it became Harley and Indian would announce their next year model year bikes in the summer, and then everything else would sort of trickle out over the course of the fall, and then maybe some into the spring. But now it's all over the place. Like the earliest bike I think that was, if not announced, but that you rode was in April was the 2025 Indian Scouts.
Yeah.
That was
And that
of
was a
20
big,
April of 2024 when you rode those.
right. They're calling them 2025's little
Yeah, yeah.
game. But yeah, the appealing motorcycles. I like high tech, and so they tossed out the old aluminum frame and put a steel frame. 101, which is a name they brought back from the 1920s or 30s. And then now they announced 60s version. So each of those Scouts have a 60 cubic inch motor instead of the 1250 cc's in the bigger Scouts. And so that's one of the updates for 2025 that Indian's making.
So we do know that we'll talk probably a little bit more about Indian's got some other stuff that'll probably be announced around the time this episode comes out. Other bikes, though, that yeah, the only bike that I think the only 2025 model that I've ridden so far, I also rode it around the same time you did. It was last April. It was the CF Moto Ibex 450, which is a $6,800 450cc adventure bike, which is looks great. It's got rally styling. It's pretty well spec'd for a bike of that price level. I mean, less than 7 grand, and it comes with tubeless spoked wheels, which is hard to get on any bike less than probably 12 grand.
Right.
I rode it in the Philippines, and it was at a global press launch, and it was a great bike. But they're not yet in the States. They're going to be, they have to get homologated for DOT, and then to be 50 state legal, they've got to go through CARB, and so they're going to probably be in dealerships. Might be as late as April, so it'll be a year after I first rode them. So I'm looking forward to getting one for a longer term test. Because yeah, just riding it for a day in the Philippines wasn't quite enough, and it was it's not our home turf. But see, what else have you ridden that's 2025? Triumph Rocket 3, Storm, R, and GT. I remember you rode those.
Yes, the Rocket 3, 2,500 cc's of ridiculousness. And it's fantastic.
Yeah,
Right, it wouldn't be the one bike in your garage, but if it was the second bike in your garage, it might be your favorite one. The fit and finish of that thing is amazing. That motor is so big, and yet the motorcycle functions as a motorcycle. You
yeah,
look at it and you would think it's a caricature and it would be stupid, like a Boss Hoss or something,
yeah,
except it handles great, and that motor is really appealing. It tr pulls from really down low, and yet it's got a nice top end surge. That's one of the yeah, Triumph's one of the rare models they still build in England. The Triumph Speed Twin 1200, which I rode a few months ago, that's another great one, and was a better motorcycle than I thought. It looks classic, kind of like a Bonneville, which is kind of like I don't know, to my mind, it's kind of stodgy. And the Speed Twin kind of like gives some contemporary styling to it. And that 1200 cc motor is plenty enough for the street. There's no shortage of power to thrill you. And I think that really struck a nerve for me, that classic styling with modern performance.
yeah. That's a great bike. I know they've upgraded it. So there's a standard model of the Speed Twin 1200. There's a Speed Twin 1200 RS, which is it's kind of the replacement for the Thruxton. I mean, it's not a cafe racer styling, but the Thruxton's no longer made. So, but what are some of the upgrades you get with the RS? Do you recall?
Öhlins
Uh,
suspension.
yeah,
Yeah.
that'll do it. Yeah,
That's the main one. Better brakes, and they got some kind of Brembos rather than the J1 stuff on the other 1200s. The R, they call it an R, or
yeah,
just the Speed Twin 1200.
yeah,
But those brakes are still good anyway. The more journalists like to turn down their nose when it's not top spec brakes, but those brakes, those J1 brakes, function perfectly well and perfectly up to the task of slowing the speeds of a Speed Twin 1200.
Well, I have to say, Triumph always seems to be rolling out new bikes. I think we probably covered 5 or 6 new models last year in terms of going to press launches and testing them and riding them. I know you've got a launch coming up soon for the Triumph Tiger Sport 800. Is that right? So again, that's
Yeah.
a adventure styled street bike. It's more of a sport tour, though it has more of an upright riding position. Yeah.
Yeah, the Tiger 800 Sport, I think, is its proper nomenclature. It is very much like a tracer. It's got a little bit of a adventure-y kind of fairing for some wind protection. It's otherwise pretty much naked. And instead of, putting knobby or knobby-ish tires on it, they're just putting regular 17s on it front and rear, and it's going to be a good traveling sports machine. Like
Yeah.
I think that. As you know, there's a lot of adventure riders who don't really go adventuring off-road.
Right.
So this is kind of a takeoff of their Tiger 800 or Tiger 900, which is an excellent platform. I also rode that last year. I really enjoyed that bike.
Yeah.
But the 800 Sport, it's lighter weight and it'll be a ripper on the canyons. I'm gonna ride it in Portugal around the time people start hearing this podcast. So look
Yeah.
for a report in Ryder Magazine on that.
Look forward to hearing about it. I mean, I have to say, Triumph is, they make you talked about a range of bikes. You're talking about the classically styled Speed Twin 1200. Talking about the complete one-off, Rocket 3, super cruiser. I mean, it's a monster cruiser because it's got this enormous engine, inline triple, largest production engine in a motorcycle. Then you're talking about a sport tour. You're talking about the Tiger 900s. They've got a wide range of bikes, as some other manufacturers also do. But yeah, they do a great job in terms of their styling, in terms of fit and finish, the tech that they've got on a lot of bikes. I know I tested the Scrambler 1200X and XE last year. Fantastic bikes, beautiful, classically styled scramblers that have, a lot of suspension travel and are fully capable adventure bikes. I mean, we were ripping them around the Anza Borrego Desert in some pretty challenging terrain and jumping them and doing all kinds of stuff, and they were great. And I have to say that one of the things I've always liked about the Triumphs I've tested over the last few years is and I don't know how they do it, but there's seems to be like this kind of baked in user friendliness to some of these Triumphs. Like we're talking about completely different styles of motorcycles, in terms of, a sport bike versus an adventure bike versus a classic style bike. But in terms of, seating position and operating the controls and just handling and so forth, they've got a real grace and user friendliness to them that I just
They
think is
have a
great.
great engineering team behind them. Honda used to stand apart from all the other manufacturers in terms of that usability, that kind of well-refined motorcycle that you didn't have to make excuses for or try to adjust something out of the way. And Triumph, as far as European manufacturers go, for as many different models as they build, they all seem to work well. And I'm looking forward to riding those 400s, the single cylinder Triumph 400s. I haven't ridden those yet, and they're like some of the best selling motorcycles in Triumph's lineup.
Yeah, I haven't ridden them either. Allison Parker went to Spain to ride those last year. She rode the Speed 400 and the Scrambler 400X, and she loved them. And yeah, they're that's the thing. I went to, I guess I did. It was here in Southern California. Husqvarna has 400, the 401s. There's the Svartpillen, which is their Scrambler styled version, and then the Vitpillen, which is the more roadster styled. But they're 401, they basically have the same engine and platform, the 399cc single that's shared with the KTM 390 Duke,
Yeah.
and absolutely fantastic motorcycles. Those are still 2024 models, the ones I tested, but they're $5,900 and they've got cornering ABS and cornering traction control and ride modes, and they look cool and they're fun to ride. And yeah, it's great. So that's one of the things that I know you and I were talking about is, so we talked about the year of the naked bike, but there are a lot of small displacement, kind of budget friendly motorcycles that are available out there. The Husky 401s, KTM 390 Duke. They just announced the 390 SMCR kind of supermoto style bike. They've got the 390 Adventure. We talked about the Scrambler 400, excuse me, the Triumph 400s, the Scrambler and the Speed 400.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool ones out there.
Well, and you mentioned the Ibex 450,
Yeah,
right? I was happy to see Suzuki finally updated the long and tooth DRZ 400. They
yeah,
gave that a complete redo, and now known as the DRZ 4S, I think, and 4SM for Supermoto. So
yeah.
two new Suzuki 400cc bikes. And yeah, there's other 400s too are in that range. Those Triumphs we mentioned, and what else am I forgetting here?
Well, there was the 204, Aprilia 20457.
Yeah.
BMW announced, at this point it's a concept bike, or what they unveiled was a concept bike, but they say it's basically production ready and will probably be announced for this year. The F450 GS, so it'll be a 450cc single cylinder GS adventure bike, so kind of a competitor for the Ibex 450.
And with BMW's engineering behind it, it's
Yeah,
going to be a good bike. Be curious to see where it slots in with an MSRP compared to its rivals.
absolutely. So before we sign off, I know that this is going to come out around the time there's going to be some big announcements for Harley Davidson Indian, so we don't really know what it's going to be yet. Harley Davidson did announce. You mentioned, for example, or we talked about the Indian Scouts and the Scout 60s. Those are for 2025. Those have been announced. You rode the full size Scouts. Harley Davidson in early January announced returning Road Glide and Street Glide. Those got major updates in 2024 in terms of styling and this huge 10.5-inch TFT display and all kinds of stuff like that. So great bikes. They announced the Road King Special. Most of these are basically unchanged except for some paint options and pricing. They announced their trike models, which is like the Freewheeler, the Tri-Glide Ultra, and the I don't remember what the third one is. But anyway, so they're going to announce more of their 2025 lineup soon. What do you think might be coming for Harley Davidson?
Well, I've heard some rumors about updates to the Softails.
Okay.
So there's some kind of a government documentation that says maybe the 117 high output motor that was seen in the Road Glide ST last year will make it to the Softail line. The one I'm most interested in, I speculated about it and I'm hoping it'll happen, but the Pan America is a high-tech Harley Davidson, and in the Moto America Super Hooligan class, the Pan America, or a sport version of the Pan America, won the championship this year. And so it may not be a Bronx like we heard 5 or 6 years ago, but that could be a really fun roadster. Make it look like the Saddleman bike, call it a Champions Edition, and I don't know, maybe make it a CVO version as one of their higher priced lines. I think that would be a fun bike to ride.
I mean, Indian came out with the FDR 1200, I don't know how many years ago, and it's a great bike. It's cool to ride. It's cool looking. It's fun to ride, and Harley's never really had a competitor for the FTR. So
Right.
something that would be in that range would be fantastic. And as we talked about, seems to be the year of the naked bike. So something like that would probably do really well and give people an alternative to, yes, they sell a boatload of baggers and cruisers and they apparently sell a lot of the Pan America adventure bikes, but they need to kind of diversify that lineup. Harley Davidson, I don't know if you've heard any rumors. I haven't, but they also need some small bikes, some
Right.
affordable, smaller displacement, entry level motorcycles. Any other rumors for Harley?
Well, not for Harley, but Indian, about the time this will get published, we've got some heard it through the grapevine kind of rumors that the Power Plus motor from the Challenger will make its way into the Chieftain platform, which would give that bike a whole bunch of extra power. That motor is the one they use in the King of the Baggers series and the Challengers there.
Right.
And so, yeah, if these rumors are correct, there's going to be a Power Plus version of the Chieftain, so liquid cooled instead of air cooled, and it'll be much faster. I don't know how it's going to look. It's always difficult to stick a radiator on a bike that didn't have one before.
Right.
But yeah, Indian's still on the gas with things over there.
Right. Yeah. Well, that liquid cooling on some of the Harley motors, they introduced it sort of gradually. They had sort of, what they would call precision liquid cooling that would really
Mhm.
focus on exhaust valves and allow them to keep the radiators kind of small and limit the plumbing. Of course, the Challenger's been fully liquid cooled since it was introduced in 2020. That was actually Ryder's motorcycle of the year for 2020 is the Challenger. It's a great motorcycle. They came out with the Pursuit version, which is the big touring version. But yeah, to have the Chieftain and which has been powered by the air-cooled Thunderstroke since it came out in for the 2014 model year. So to have a different engine option would be fantastic. So
The other bit of American news is Buell, right? The longtime maker of sport bikes or nakeds. They stuck that liquid cooled motor into an FXR styled steel tube frame chassis, and it looks like a cruiser, even though it's got a liquid cooled engine. And I got to take that for a spin a little while back, and boy, that thing was fun to ride. Having that 175 horsepower, they're
wow.
saying, in a cruiser, like does second gear wheelies off the throttle. That thing was a hoot to ride, and they've got a ton of pre-orders already. I was riding around Huntington Beach, and I kept running into people who said, "Yeah, I got my pre-orders in," and I'm like, "How could there be that many of you here? I'm just out riding for the day."
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the thing that keeps the Buell Motorcycle Company alive. The
Well, I
sales.
mean, performance V twins have been hot for the last few years, and people sink a lot of money into those things. But there's only so much you can do with a air-cooled engine or a certain engine platform. So to start with basically a much more high-performance engine to begin with and platform, like I said, you wouldn't really have to do a whole lot to it. It's already going to be powerful and fast. But of course, somebody's going to take a Buell Super Cruiser and do even more tweaks to it. So, but yeah, that sounds awesome. I'd love to ride one of those things. I haven't ridden a Buell since they went, Harley shuttered them in what, '09, so
Yeah.
it's been a long time, and so
If
well, hey,
anyone's interested in reading about the Buell Super Cruiser, it'll be up on AmericanRider.com. So there's a review of what it was like to ride the prototype.
yeah, check out the American Rider YouTube channel. Kevin's got an interview with Fuel CEO and talks about riding the bike and so forth. So yeah, any idea when that might reach production or rolling out to customers?
They say this fall.
Okay,
So fall's a 3-month period. I'm sure they'll make it there
okay,
somewhere.
okay. All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed. But like I say, we've got a lot of, we're just rolling into the 2025 model year. We've tested some of the bikes that we've talked about in this episode. I know, Duke, later this spring, you're going to go ride the Yamaha R9 for the
Mm.
first time. That's a new model, but of course, it uses the same cross plane concept triple that's in the Tracer 9 GT that we talked about. It's also in the MTO9 and MTO9 SP that we were new last year or updated last year that tested. So it
And
seems
that's
to definitely be what some of these companies want to do is they've got a great motor and it's a flexible platform. It's like, what other types of models can we put it in?
That's an interesting entry into the market because, like I was saying about the sport bike market and it drying up or much less interest anyway. And so they took this naked bike or adventure tour or sport touring engine and stuck it in a sport bike, and it looks great. It's got like the wings and stuff like MotoGP, and the instead of giving it the full R1 racer treatment, the bars are actually fairly high and it's not that uncomfortable. So. Yeah, I'll get to ride that at Sonoma Raceway soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. That engine, I love hearing it, and if I can just keep wrapping off the rev limiter, I'll be have a good day.
Well, I mean, Yamaha did that with the R7. They've discontinued the R6, so that's their inline four in the middleweight segment. They discontinued it. The R7, which is again a more affordable and more approachable in terms of livability sport bike, that's got the same engine that's in the MTO7, that's in the Tenere 700 adventure bike. It's in the R7, and so it's more affordable. My buddy Eric's got one. He loves it. He takes it to the track, but it also makes for a great street bike.
Hmm.
So, well, we'll certainly do another episode or two to talk about more 2025 bikes as we ride them. We certainly want to talk more about the announcements of once we hear what Indian and Harley Davidson are going to roll out for 2025. Hopefully, there's some exciting stuff. We don't usually get a lot of surprises from those two American brands, but it would be great to have something that we didn't see coming. So,
Revisit
well,
that subject later.
awesome. Well, Duke, I appreciate you joining me. For everybody listening, thank you very much. Keep the rubber side down. I'm Greg Drevenstead with the Ryder Magazine Insider Podcast. Take care.
If you've enjoyed listening to the Ryder Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Ryder Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.